Welcome to the Leading Conversations podcast, sponsored by the Excel Leadership Network. On each episode, J.D. Pairing will have conversations with church planting pastors and leaders from around the country. You can learn more about how to connect with Excel at the end of this podcast. Let's join J.D. now and listen in on this leading conversation.
Well, welcome to another podcast with Excel Leadership Network. This is the Leading Conversations podcast, and today we are thrilled to have the great and mighty and wonderful Don Proctor with us today. Don is the director, the president, the grand poobah of the City Pastors Fellowship of Sacramento, which is maybe the strongest in the United States of bringing city pastors together. Don has done a wonderful job of getting pastors to coordinate, come together, work with each other, pray for each other. So Don, thanks for being here today.
Honor to be here, JD.
Yeah, and you're here in wonderful Sacramento.
Amen. Yes, we love Sacramento.
Okay. Hey, tell us your story. Start at the beginning, how you came to Christ and all of that.
Awesome. Well, interesting enough, I didn't grow up in a Christian home, so I didn't get saved till I was 20. And how that happened was my dad told me, hey, there's this guy that's got a job opening on a Saturday, while you're going to junior college, has an auto parts store, you can just run parts. He said, hey, he's one of those born again Christians. And so
He's one of those.
I said, well, yeah, so he's a real nice guy, but he's one of those born again Christians. And so I said, okay, whatever. So I went to work with him and just really fell in love with the guy because he was just a fun, good guy. Anyway, he'd grown up Catholic and just got radically saved. I think probably about 3 years prior to me being there at that time. And so I began to just watch his life. I saw how he treated people, how he treated his wife. I go, wow, they don't even yell at each other. I go, what's wrong with that's not normal, is it? Because that's the way I grew up, I had great parents. My parents they loved us. They did everything possible for us, but nobody's perfect, and they just always yelled a lot. And I thought, man, I don't know if I really want to do that, whenever I get married. But anyway, so I just saw his life, how he treated people, his wife and his son, and I go, oh man, maybe there is a difference in how being a Christian, because all I knew was my friends in high school that said they were Christians, but they kind of made me look like a saint, at times. So I never really could see the difference. Well, if it's about good, getting into heaven, I'm in. So when I saw his life and really saw how he truly lived out the message of Jesus, it ministered to my heart in a huge way. And I go, well, maybe there is a difference. I know I want to go to heaven. And so it was just one day in my room. One night I just asked Jesus into my heart, and it just began from there. So I was about 20 years old. He was currently going to Calvary Chapel churches, so I just went with him and started going. I saw, wow, they got a band in their church. I'm used to the organ, the big organ. I go to visit my grandparents in LA. They would go to a Methodist church, twice a year, because that's when we'd visit around Christmas and Easter. So that's all I ever knew was seeing the big pipe organ. I saw a live band. I go, wow, that's different. So I just began to go with him and grow, and then he would have Bible studies at his house, and it just was a huge, it just shaped my life, and I was obviously never the same again. So it was a very interesting journey. That one of the hardest probably memorials I ever had to do was his. Almost makes me cry thinking about it, because he got stomach cancer. This was probably, gosh, what was this, 10, 12 years ago, maybe? And he got stomach cancer, and he ended up passing away at like 53. And I think when you do those types of things, it's like, God uses people to literally almost rescue you out of hell. It's hard not to, get emotional about that. But
Sure.
yeah, it wasn't for him, I wouldn't be probably on the Zoom call with you or this podcast with you today. So that's kind of my beginning of coming to know Jesus. Uh, and then soon enough, my parents came on, once I met my wife and her life, and, realized, man, maybe this is God, So, but that's kind of the beginning of my uh, coming to know Jesus.
Wow. Well, thank you for sharing that. One parched guy, um, store owner.
Yeah,
So
yeah, store
he
owner.
changed your life. That's phenomenal. Now,
Yeah.
how did you step into ministry? What was that about?
Well, goodness. So it was probably 6 years after that. A friend of mine, I was about 25 at the time, and I was just trying to look to settle down, living in Sacramento, bought my first house at that time. I was in construction, I was an electrician. Uh, I My friend told me about this girl, and he said, "Do you know of her?" I said, "No, I never heard of her." He said, she's a pastor's daughter." I said, "Well, if you know the pastor, why don't you just give him a call? Make sure she's single, because I'm not going to show up at the church if she's not single." And so I ended up. He found out that she is single. I showed up at the church. I saw her from a distance,
So
and I
you're
thought,
just going to churches to pick up girls at that time.
yeah. Well, at this
Is
point, I'm ready to settle down. I'm not gonna,
that-
I'm very spiritual, JD. So I show up at this church. She's leading worship. I go, okay, this is looking pretty good so far. Yeah. From a distance, I can say, okay, she's beautiful. We got a good start here. Like I said, I'm very spiritual. Um, then I was probably 2 weeks later. I finally met her. I went up and introduced myself to her dad, who was a pastor. Said, "Hey, we had a common friend. This is a friend that reached out to him." And so I met her mom and her sister. I think it was only 2 weeks later that I met her. And man, the minute she opened her mouth, I go, "Oh gosh, she's the one." Just the confidence, the just love the Lord. I could just tell she was the one, and she didn't think I was the one at first. But uh, so I hung out, and try to make a long story short, 3 months later we're engaged. 6 months later after that we're married.
3 months.
Yeah,
Three
so
months.
within 9 months we are married from the time that we met. So
Oh my
it
goodness.
was a
You're
God
a pretty
thing.
pretty quick mover there,
Pretty
Don.
quick. Yeah, I didn't mess around. I make a decision. So obviously, you marry the pastor's daughter because her parents had been pastoring for 20 years. They were trying to look to make decisions into another, what's their next. They didn't know what it would be. And then here we come along. My wife's got she could do it all really, really well. And I think when she first met me, she thought, well, this guy doesn't want to be a pastor. And this probably was never on my radar. And so she was fine with that. But then just God kind of does things in you. He used some people that were very prophetic that came to our church that would, that we had this prophetic ministry where we have people praying over couples or singles, whoever they were. It was kind of, we call it a presbytery. I don't know your background, or if you're familiar with that, then you'd have kind of, we had pastors that were very prophetic. They come in, they begin to just pray over you and speak things over you. And they'd spoken that, hey, you guys would be like the shepherds of the house one day and all this. So that's a pretty strong word. So you always kind of get permission from the lead pastor beforehand, say, hey, this is what we're leaning towards, but is this something that's in them, or do you see this in them? Because they have a very much a respect for the local church and just that covering and the leadership chain. So they spoke that over us. So I had that word in me. So when this interim period came, it helped me to have more peace. Because if it was up to me, JD, I would never been ready. I would have said, yeah, 10, 15 years down the road, I'm an electrician. My wife's doing outside sales and selling computer chips. We have really good jobs, making decent money. We're just getting started having a family. And so I never thought I would be in that place. Well, that word, when everything came down, when my in-laws were ready to make a change, and they really had to make a sudden change because there was just things going on in their life that, in their marriage, that it had to happen. So, this, here we are, we're thrust into this role, and I had never preached before. So I say this is the same year Joel Osteen took over from his dad when his dad passed away. He never preached before. I had never preached before. It was the exact same year. I always say that, he had a revival, we had kind of a Gideon revival. We went in reverse. It was a tough time, but it was obviously a very much a learning curve, and learning about people, learning about leadership, learning about just how sudden changes can really, how it affects everybody, even though they say they're with you, but are they really with you, when you go through a tough time. So anyway, we went through that. We had a 4-month interim, then they had to vote us in. And so they ended up voting us in. It was like 75%. Some stuck around just to vote, and then they took off. But here we are. That was, excuse me, that was, gosh, where were we at? That was 26 years ago that took place. So we began. That's kind of my journey coming into pastoring. That's how I kind of started. So I don't know how much more you want me to go beyond that, but that's
Yeah,
how
well,
I
just
got
tell us what
started.
happened. You pastored for how long?
So I ended up pastoring total for 18 years. So we ended up pastoring for 18 years, and then we passed the baton to the Father's house, which is out of Vacaville, and we became a Roseville campus so that I could do city pastors fellowship full time. I always tell people, look, if you ever feel like the grace is lifted on that role, and you could probably attest to that too, it's time to move on. It's better sooner than later. So we just knew, and then the timing, we had a kind of a son in the Lord that was back at the Vacaville campus, because we had a long history with Pastor David Donna for many years, probably over 30 years. So we had that connection. We had that DNA was all very similar. So we had a son in the Lord that was going to be sent out from their church to go plant a church. So I said, well, why don't you just have him come here? We'll make this a Roseville campus. We'll just be kind of an associate. Just our role will just be in the city, doing our thing. And that's what happened. It's going on, oh goodness, 8 years ago now.
So how
So
did the city pastors thing? Let's back up. How did that happen?
what
Where
happened
did
with
this
city
come from?
pastors, really city pastors kind of, if I could kind of make the beginning of that, how it came about, it was really in the beginning, JD, another pastor from another denomination reached out to me when I first started pastoring. I was just trying to keep my head above water, just surviving. And he reached out. He just had a revelation about what we're seeing now with cross pollinating and it's bringing pastors together. So he brought 7 of us pastors together in Roseville. I just began to hang out with these guys and begin to just minister life to me. It's like, wow, there's other guys that have bigger problems, more issues going on than even I do, with much bigger churches. And he just cared about me. He just had a heart. He knew I couldn't give anything back, but that's what he just kept giving out. And it just really touched my life. It really marked me for when city pastors came about later on. It was because of this one pastor. So when we did this for about 5 or 6 years, coming together, we go on retreats maybe once or twice a year, the 7 of us. We do some things in the city together, prayer events and coming together. And then when he retired after about 5 or 6 years, everybody kind of went back to their quarters. You know what I mean? They went back to their own ministry because he was kind of our guy to
It
make
was
it
the
all
glue.
happen. What's that?
It
He
was
was
the
a
glue.
glue. Yes, he was a glue. So when he left, we went back to our own deals, and then it was probably 2 years after that. So that was about 2008, I believe. We had a Slavic service going on in our church at that time, and then we had a Baptist guy that was doing a church plant out here in West Roseville, and I just, because of this pastor and the relationship I had with the other pastors, like Francis and Fuso was a part of that in the beginning too. it just marked me. And I just felt like, gosh, these pastors, they're isolated. We need encouragement. I know the alone feeling. And I had this heart because this other pastor would bring in other people from other like countries that saw unity and transformation happen too. And like I said, I didn't grow up in church, don't understand all the different denominations, but I see where Jesus is moving. It's like, well, where there's unity, there's blessing. Why would we not want that over our city? Why are we not working together, even though we don't agree on everything? So I'm taking all this stuff and processing it over those 5, 6, 7 years. And I thought, well, why don't we just get pastors together? We'll have a lunch at our church. We'll get you reach out to your Baptist guys. I'll reach out to my guys. A Slavic pastor friend, he reached out to his. And I said, let's just have a lunch. We'll do a free lunch. We'll cook an amazing meal for them and just remind them, hey, guys, we're in this together. We love you. We want to see you succeed. As you succeed, we're all succeeding. So we had our first lunch at our church. We had about 20 pastors come, and that's where it began. And so uh, from there, we ended up having them each quarter. So we probably spent the first year and a half at our church doing it there. And then when more pastors would get on board and just see value in it, then we just begin to see the value, what God's doing in Sacramento. And we thought, man, we've got to touch every culture and denomination. So we need to find guys around the region that would host, that wouldn't try to take it over, but would pay for it. Because I had no money. I didn't even get a nonprofit status for the first 7 years. So I just built trust. It was very organic. It still kind of is now. It's all through trusted relationship. So we started there. Francis got on board. He would host at also and really step it up, spend all kinds of money on these the pastors and their spouse, when they came. Uh, yeah, we just began to move around the region. And my heart was always when we first started getting together, I said, guys, we just care about you. We just want to see all of us, fulfill the grace on our lives because we're in this together, whether you realize it or not. I always believe that in Psalm it says, give us a nation for our inheritance, but I believe it's coming into Jesus' last prayer that we become one. And it's a very dynamic thing, but it's powerful, but it's going to take a lot of work, right, to get there too, and building trust and all that. So yeah, we begin to move around the region and just begin to grow. And I know, JD, that, and you know this, unless this works for you, you send out an email for an event, that doesn't mean everybody's coming. It's like you've got to make connections along the way. And I knew in between those lunches, I just reached out to those pastors, had a lot of coffees, one-on-one. I would text them on a Sunday morning, just encourage them, remind them that, hey, we're in this together. I care about you. We're just praying for you. And just so when it came around every quarter, it was just a little more meaningful because they had a connection. And they know that, this is not just another thing. They knew after the first year and a half, we weren't going to, drop the ball. Okay, what's the agenda and push something out there. We just knew we had to keep it agenda free and just keep loving on each other and encourage each other. And through that, we've seen church mergers happen. We've seen relationships that are in that room that would never have been in that room years prior because they worked out their differences. They worked out things like he left this church, started this church plant, took my people. You got all that going on, but in the end, it's like, hey, guys, we're in this together, and we've got to work through this stuff. And I know we've done wrong. We hope everybody would apologize and take the Jesus road, but we still have to. We can't afford offenses and unforgiveness because we have our whole city to reach. And I think it was through Jim Carmichael was that first pastor that really brought us all together. But what it made me realize when he brought these other people in, these other pastors that saw transformation happen in their city. And I don't know if you know the story of Idi Amin in Uganda when he was just an evil dictator. People were dying at times. You didn't know if you're going to wake up the next morning, but it forced these pastors to come together. And they had to come together for their very lives, their very family, their church, their region. And through that, it transformed that whole region to where it was dedicated to the devil. Literally for 200 years, they dedicated to Jesus Christ. They filled arenas and they prayed and they brought in righteous leadership. And that's where they had so many mega churches down in that area. That's where it started, was in that season. And honestly, I'm just a simple guy. I read it for what it is, and it's like we come together. There's blessing. We work through things, even though we don't agree upon everything. We still, because we want to reach people, and we want to see people know who they are in Christ, and working together. And so that's the way I'm looking at all these things. And so it really ministered to me. It's like, why can't we do it now? Why do we have to wait till we're at our lowest point? Why can't we work together when we're at whatever season we're in, but still keep bringing us together? So that's where my heart is. I truly want to see transformation and see revival that's sustainable. I don't know all the ingredients. I don't know what's enough unity that just brings God. I don't know what
That's
is enough.
enough unity. That's funny.
Yeah, what's enough desperation in all the hearts of pastors in the church to bring a sustainable revival? I only God can create that stuff. I'm just trying to make a place for it, and in a safe place where we can work together and let God change us, as we need to, if we're open to it. Because I don't know about you, but I'd love to turn a switch to change people's mindset, even when I was pastoring. But God had to intervene, and I know He has to intervene upon His church too, and the pastors that lead it. But that's what kind of brought us to this place. And like I said, I said through this safe place, we see church burgers, people pass a baton to somebody that they met at one of the luncheons. We've seen more collaboration of different communities of pastors. And I know I'm doing all the talking, so I don't. If you want to break up stuff, you just tell me.
Well,
But
tell us where. Give us kind of a state of the union of the City Pastors Fellowship of Sacramento right now. What's happening now?
well, I think now what I'm working on right now is to try to really help. As you know, you're a church planner, so you're planting churches, but we see more churches closing than opening. And I think that if I can keep connecting with pastors and keep encouraging them and maybe resourcing them in whatever season that they're in, there's so many soul needs sometimes too, whether you need counseling or you need a retreat just to get away. You see the value of fellowship. That's why you're doing what you're doing. Even though you're planning a church, you're not leaving them alone. You're still connecting with them. All those things are so important. So I'm trying to create more. How do we help every pastor in whatever season that they're in? So we're trying to create a resource page of partnerships of ministries that are going on to help pastors in their season. So we're trying to put that together and raise funds to where, if money is ever an issue, we never want that to be the reason not to reach out. And even on the church planting side, I see with you, and there's a couple other church planting organizations like, Craig Whitney and different things. If we could create some of these things that are already in place that you guys are passionate about, these pastors, hey, I want to plant a church, but I don't know how. Well, here's the group of people you could talk to, and they've got different facets of how that could work, but they're ready to help you if you want help, and just try to keep the church moving forward instead of backwards, and seeing these guys with discouragement and churches under 100 that don't know what to do. It's just planting them with people that do know what to do. And I think that's kind of my motivation this year, is to get more of that in place. Um, and that could be the encouraging arm of city pastors, because that could help people a lot in wherever they're at. So
How many pastors are involved now, would you say?
we over the 18 years, we've reached probably over 800 different pastors at one time or another. We probably average, as close to a couple hundred come to the luncheons. I would say on average of a church represented, because we invite spouse too, there's probably 145 churches that are represented each time. and it's always different because these pastors, they got emergencies, they're out of town, as you have ministry, you have different things going on. So I try to stay in touch with a lot, but we created something else, convener pastors, which Tim kind of helps do in Elk Grove, reach those pastors. So I don't know if you want me to share about that, but
Yeah, why don't you talk a little bit about what the
okay.
convener pastors?
So it was probably 10 years ago, we realized that pastors were getting together in different pockets all around Sacramento. And I thought, well, gosh, why don't we? I was working with Jeff Kreiser at the time, and he kind of helped me put this together. So we broke down the whole Sacramento region into the whole 2.4 million people into 40 city communities. And so we would find those pastors that were doing something within that community, come alongside them, and do like a little lunch event that would be hosted at each one of those convener pastor churches, at some point or another, just so we can all know where they're at in the region. And we just said, hey, what are you guys doing? How can we learn from each other? How can we pray for you? Uh, Obviously they have a heart for pastors, so they're doing something beyond their pastoring their local church, which says a lot about them and seeing the value in this. So we get together 4 times a year, about probably 2 or 3 weeks before the bigger luncheon, and we just say, hey, how are you doing? How can we learn from each other? How can we pray for you? And yeah, kind of learn from there. So we probably have 23 of the 40 represented at some point, throughout the region, a representative of a pastor in those areas. So, but it's been really good because they've got together to do different things as they build relationship and trust. Um, it's always a challenge, JD, because you've got guys. It's like the Acts Church. It's like you've got people that come to the bigger meetings, and then you got the guys that only come to the small groups. The meeting in the houses and that kind of thing in that way. So that's the way it is with the conveners. You'll have them some will come to that, but some won't come to the bigger ones. Some will come to the bigger ones. They'll only come to the small. It's one of those things you don't know why, but they have their real little reasons. But we just feel like we're trying to touch them at one point. And I always tell the conveners, look, if they don't come to a prayer meeting or whatever, just meet with them for coffee. That's when they begin to open up their hearts anyway, and connect and just see how they're doing. So that's what we started the convener pastors. That was probably over 10 years ago. And it's been a really big help because I
Have
just,
you, have
yeah.
you had influence on some of the other cities in the U.S.?
Yeah, I just was down in Lodi 2 weeks ago, and they're starting a quarterly luncheon. There's about probably 30 churches represented there. There's probably about 50 in Lodi. I think there's about 100 in Stockton. So we see that. I've connected across to North Carolina. What I've found is everybody has their little uniqueness of what they're doing. Some are more missional minded, some are more network, fellowship. So it's kind of like we're all doing a little bit similar things, but a little unique where we're at. Uh, but yeah, there is some others going on, and I try to connect with more. So I'm always, if you ever hear of any in other cities, please always give me their number. I'd
I'll
love
do that.
to.
I'll connect you. So what's
Yeah.
your biggest need right now, Don?
Oh gosh, I think my biggest need is to get probably more resources. I need to ask for probably more monies to be able to get more things in place to help pastors. You know what I mean? To where, hey guys, you're going through this, we can help you in this. And we've got people in place. This is what they do. I think that's probably my greatest. I mean, we always need more pastors that share the same heart like you do. You know what I mean? That have a heart for other pastors, that gave up their church to do what you're doing. And so I always love to see that. But I think right now I'm in kind of a resource stage where we need more the finances to help sustain this and to grow it. That's
Well,
probably my
I
greatest thing.
really appreciate what you're doing. It's just amazing to come together and see 150 pastors, a couple hundred churches together, and just have a lunch, learning from each other. Great stuff. Hey, last question. Give us a
Yeah.
leadership tip. What's your big leadership tip?
Oh gosh. I would say my leadership tip that I could tell today is is be who you are called to be as a leader. Don't try to be somebody else. You be you, who God's graced you with the gifting, the talents, the things. Don't compare yourself to other people. You just be that strong, have your identity wrapped in Him, and be led by the Holy Spirit, and don't compare yourself to others, because you're in your race, and nobody can do it but you. And know that how important it is, and how valued you are, and how if you don't do what you do, it won't help have an effect on all the other things that are going on. And I think people underestimate the power of who they are in Jesus, and what has God placed in them to fulfill. And that would be probably my leadership tip, is just be all that you can in Christ, because nobody can be you. And you are more powerful and more, I say, you can make a difference more than you realize. Because if we're all running in our lane, running in our race, it's going to affect everybody around us in our city, our region, and the world. And so that would probably be my leadership tip.
Well, that's a good one, and it comes from your story. One person having an impact on you, and one pastor having an impact on what you're doing now. So thanks for what you're doing. Keep it up. Let us know how we can help. And we really appreciate you being on today.
Well, I appreciate you, JD. Thanks for all that you do.
Thanks for joining the Leading Conversations podcast. We hope that you found it both helpful and encouraging. At Excel Leadership Network, our focus is on the church planter rather than the church. If you'd like to find out more about us, visit our webpage at excelnetwork.org. Don't forget to subscribe to this podcast so you don't miss any future episodes. See you next time with another Leading Conversation.